wild exaggeration, how a regulatory issue that had very little impact on how the internet actually worked between 2015 and 2017, how that became a life or death scenario, just demonstrates the level of hysteria for people who really don't understand what the issue is, even on the most basic level. I'm not an expert on net neutrality. I don't pretend to be an expert on net neutrality. But the basic issue is not about the destruction of the internet as we know it. Yeah, it's just patently insane. But Jimmy Kimmel went off on it, and here he is. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel, first of all, I feel like every time Jimmy Kimmel speaks politics now, he should be morally obligated to bring out his baby, to trot out his child, since he obviously makes emotional appeals on what he really should do, if he's not going to bring out his own kid to talk healthcare, what he really should do is he should bring out a poor homeless urchin, street urchin, who will no longer be able to access internet at the public library for purposes of pornography. And he should just drape his arm around him. And then he should say, this poor child will no longer have internet because of net neutrality. He basically did that last night just without the poor street urchin. Again, I don't know what qualifies Jimmy Kimmel to talk about these things. And I'm happy for Jimmy Kimmel to, have a debate with somebody who knows about it. But Jimmy Kimmel doesn't want to do any of those things. He just wants to read Chuck Schumer agitprop. So here he is.
The FCC did something absolutely despicable today. They voted to put an end to net neutrality. Now, this is the rule that says everyone gets equal access to the internet. A big company or somebody selling crocheted owls from their house in the Midwest. Now, as long as they tell us they're doing it now, internet service providers will be allowed to slow down or block web traffic to any website or streaming service they like, which benefits the big telecom companies and does the opposite for all of us. But I just want to say thank you, President Trump. Thanks to you and this jackhole you appointed to run the FCC.
He's a jackal, so it's funny.
Are about to take full control of the internet.
So it's like comedy. It's like he's a jackal, so it's comedy now. It's not just political. It's because he said jackhole. Get it? Ha ha ha. I love Jimmy Kimmel speaking on behalf of ABC, Disney, the biggest corporation on planet Earth, right? I mean, he's on ABC. Disney just bought Fox 21st Century, right? They just bought it, okay, outright. Disney is an enormous corporation. And here is Jimmy Kimmel talking on ABC's airwaves on what is basically an oligopoly, right? ABC was allowed to dominate the airwaves because it was one of 3 networks for most of its history. And here he is talking about, those corporations, they're going to be controlling everything, those big corporations, because you know who doesn't know anything about big corporations is Jimmy Kimmel. Right? And I love when he says that, like Grandma and her crochet website, that's the one that's going to pay the price for net neutrality being done away with. The whole point is that Netflix, Google, YouTube oppose it, not Grandma with her crochet website. No one cares about Grandma's crochet website. You'd think that Verizon's sitting around going, aha, now we got Grandma in the crosshairs, we're going to make her pay up. I mean, she wants her crochet website up there? I got to double her price. What absolute sheer nonsense. I mean, what he's saying doesn't even make any sense. And it neglects the fact that there are big corporations on both sides of this. Like, we're going to have a giant fight. Dave Burge, Iowa Hawk, had a great tweet on this. He basically said, I never thought that the end of the world was going to come over the people who actually provide the content to social media arguing over who should benefit from their content provision. The ISPs or the companies like Facebook. That's really what it is. Like the cows arguing over who should benefit more over their provision of the milk, the grocery store, the farmer. That's really all that's happening here. But it's just, it's insipid, and the level of ire is totally crazy. And again, people don't know about it. Like Jimmy Kimmel doesn't know what he's talking about here. Again, I'm not an expert, but I know more than Jimmy Kimmel. So Jimmy Kimmel trotted out his child again last night, and I hate this more than I can tell you when people do this. Okay, I can safely say, because it has been scientifically verified, that I have the 2 cutest children on planet Earth. In fact, I have a child of 3.5 years, a girl of 3.5 years old, who is so cute that last night she actually started doing lines from the room. And no, I'm not kidding. She is amazing. But she also happened to have a heart condition. She had an open heart surgery that was performed at the same hospital by the same doctor as Jimmy Kimmel's son. And yet I do not routinely trot out my daughter's story whenever I talk about health care. When I'm talking about Obamacare policy, I don't say, and I know about this because my daughter had her chest cut open because they had to fix an ASD, a hole in her heart. I don't do that because it's stupid. I don't do that because I don't think that there's virtue in victimhood. I don't think that just because something bad happened to you in life, that means that now you know more about that thing than anyone else. I think that this reference to personal experience when it comes to policy matters is actually the end of policy, because the reality is it's a very watered-down form of identity politics. The reality is that politics is based on the idea that I can talk about ideas and you can talk about ideas because we can sympathize with one another, because we can think what it would be like to walk in one another's shoes without actually having walked in those shoes. If talk about healthcare is restricted to only those who have used the healthcare system, if talk about financial systems is restricted to only those who have worked in the financial system, then pretty quickly we are going to come to the end of politics. We can all have opinions on matters of public policy, specifically because we have the capacity as independent human beings to think about what all of these things mean for us and for others. Right? The way that politics is done is by shaping policy around what we would think it would be like to be another person. We don't actually have to have experienced that thing. Right? You don't have to have actually experienced the Holocaust in order to think the Holocaust was bad. You don't actually have to have experienced homophobia in order to think homophobia is bad. You don't have to have experienced racism in order to think that racism is bad. Right? All of these things we can think about and come to moral conclusions about without actually having personally experienced them. This is one of the reasons why I really dislike what Jimmy Kimmel does whenever he brings out his child to talk about healthcare policy. So here's his unsuspecting kid. His unsuspecting kid had a second surgery last week. I guess he has one more when he's age 6, and then he is done for life. We can hope and pray. So Kimmel brings out his kid to talk about the Children's Health Insurance Program. So Children's Health Insurance Program is basically a supplemental health insurance program for kids who are poor and parents who cannot take care of those kids properly, medically speaking. It was sponsored originally by Orrin Hatch, Republican from Utah, in the Senate in 1997. Republicans have been continuously funding it ever since, so have Democrats. And now there's a bit of a holdup in terms of final funding for the CHIP program. But that is not because Republicans are uncaring or unfeeling. Yet that is what Kimmel says. So Kimmel brings out his kid to talk about CHIP. What does his kid have to do with CHIP? The answer is nothing. His kid has nothing to do with CHIP. Right? His kid is not on CHIP. Right? The fact is that Jimmy Kimmel is a very, very wealthy man. He has health insurance, I am sure, through ABC. But Jimmy Kimmel brings out his child and he starts talking about CHIP because for some reason the experience of his child connects with CHIP in some way. Like, you don't have to show me a sick child in order for you to make the case for CHIP, whether it's good public policy or bad public policy, but that's just what Jimmy Kimmel does. So here is Jimmy Kimmel jumping right in and talking about why his son's surgery links up to healthcare policy for poor people who are not him or something.
CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program. It covers around 9 million American kids whose parents make too much money to qualify for Medicaid but don't have access to coverage, affordable coverage to their jobs, which means it almost certainly covers children you know. About 1 in 8 children are covered only by CHIP, and it's not controversial. It's not a partisan thing. In fact, the last time funding for CHIP was authorized was in 2015. It passed with a vote of 392 to 337 in the House and 92 to 8 in the Senate. Overwhelmingly, Democrats and Republicans supported it until now. Now CHIP has become a bargaining chip. It's on the back burner while they work out their new tax plans, which means parents of children with cancer and diabetes and heart problems are about to get letters saying their coverage could be cut off next month. Merry Christmas, right?
Oh, those evil Republicans, Merry Christmas. And then he goes on and he talks about how tax cuts are the real problem with this, right? He says they let this money expire while they work on getting tax cut for their millionaire and billionaire donors. And so this is the shtick that Jimmy Kimmel is pushing right now. By the way, the so-called tax cuts for the millionaire and billionaire donors, okay, we talked yesterday about how the Senate botched the bill. If you make over $615,000 and you're self-employed and you have like a kid, there's a good shot you're actually going to pay more in taxes than you will make in money above a certain amount of money if you live in a high-tax state like California or New Jersey. But Jimmy Kimmel doesn't know what he's talking about. And this is the problem, right? Everyone is sitting here, and the visuals matter. So you're sitting here, and you're watching his very cute child. And that is a very cute child, right? That's an adorable kid. And you feel terrible for that adorable kid. As well you should, right? I know. I've been in this situation. I know what it's like to have an adorable child who's had to be cut open. I get it, okay? But what he is saying is pure nonsense here, okay? What he is saying is not factually correct. Okay, the House passed legislation last month to fund CHIP for 5 more years. Democrats opposed it. Democrats opposed it on the grounds they didn't like its funding mechanism. It passed the House anyway. The Senate Finance Committee passed a version of that bill too. They haven't figured out the offsets for funding it. Why do they need the offsets for funding it? They need the offsets for funding it because in order for them to pass it through the Senate without it being filibustered, you have to show that it's not going to add to the deficit. Okay, so the Senate already is considering pushing it. President Trump last week signed funding for CHIP that will take it all the way through the end of January 31st, funded by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That federal agency has been signing checks to states for the last 2 months. CHIP is not going unfunded. Senator Hatch, again, the original sponsor of the CHIP program, has pushed forward the KIDS Act, reauthorizing CHIP for another 5 years as well. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on Sunday said, quote, "We need to make sure the Children's Health Insurance Program, which is expiring, gets to panel before the end of the year." It's not that people are wasting time on tax cuts. These two issues are completely disconnected. The tax cuts have nothing to do with CHIP. Nothing. But Kimmel's trying to promote a narrative that isn't even true, and he's using his son to do it, which is just yucky. Okay, it's just gross. The fact is, again, tax cuts have nothing. These are two completely separate legislative efforts. And not only are they completely separate legislative efforts, what's hilarious about this is that Kimmel is saying that the Republicans are trying to hold up Chip because they're trying to help out their millionaire and billionaire friends. They're taking money from kids like Jimmy Kimmel's son, except if Jimmy Kimmel's son were poor, and they're trying to use that money to pay off all of these super wealthy people. You know where the Republicans are trying to get the money to pay for Chip? You want to know where they're trying to get the money to pay for Chip, where the offsets are? For high-income earners on Medicare. In other words, they're trying to get it from rich old people. They're trying to take the money from rich old people and make sure that young, sick kids can get it. And Jimmy Kimmel is sitting there ripping on the Republicans for it. Now, again, the point of this is that optics in politics means everything. Optics in politics is the whole shebang. And the fact that he is willing to use his child for optics like this, I find it really distasteful. I think it's bad for the country. I think, again, that it drives us to a place in politics where we can't have conversations with one another. Because if I didn't have a kid who had a condition, would I be able to critique Jimmy Kimmel? Would people pay attention to it? Or if I were just another conservative commentator, if I were Avik Roy, right, who's not even particularly conservative on all things healthcare, let's say I were Avik Roy, and I don't think Avik has had a kid with a condition like this, but let's say that you're a full-on expert in healthcare. This is what you did full-time, right? You worked over at Cato Institute or at Heritage Foundation, and this is what you did full-time, but you don't have a sick kid? We're not going to pay as much attention to you as we do to Jimmy Kimmel because Jimmy Kimmel has a child who's playing with his thumb while he talks. I hate this stuff more than I can tell you. I think it's opportunistic. I think Jimmy Kimmel is doing something morally bad here. I think it is morally bad to use your child's condition as a lever in order to promote your favored policies, especially when your child's condition has nothing to do with those policies. Policy is about what's good for the bulk of the American people. It is not about what sympathy level you can garner by bringing out a cute child or a cute puppy. And to me, this argument is no different than if Nancy Pelosi would start stumping for Obamacare and she'd bring out a cute puppy and stroke it while she was talking, and then every so often reference the puppy. Right? Again, not because puppies and children are the same. I'm virulently against this notion, right? Whenever people say that they have a dog and it's their four-legged child, I just want to kind of kick them in the ass. But what is particularly ridiculous about this is, again, the notion that Jimmy Kimmel, what he's saying is factually wrong, but somehow it's given added credibility. And if you look at the headlines today about Jimmy Kimmel, I'm going to tell you what some of the headlines say, right, on various outlets. So, USA Today, joined by his son Billy, an emotional Jimmy Kimmel makes the case for Chip. TV Line, Jimmy Kimmel brings son to live for Chip funding plea. Daily Beast, Jimmy Kimmel with son in tow delivers tear-filled plea for health insurance. Jimmy Kimmel and Billy blast Congress for holding Chip hostage, according to Deadline. Jimmy Kimmel brings out his son to talk about health care. At any point in here, would somebody like to point out the fact that everything Jimmy Kimmel says about this thing is actually not true? Like, would that be useful at any point to actually talk about the facts of the situation? Or are we just going to be bamboozled by the fact that he's bringing out a cute kid? Again, I can bring out cute kids too. I'm not sure it would make the show more visually interesting if I were to have my son and daughter on my knees while I did it. I just don't think that it would add to the political points I'm making very much, and I think it would be a cheap political trick. We have known for years that politicians kissing babies is a cheap political trick. It is no less cheap